A very good Tuesday morning to you. I hope this is finding you well as always. I hope that your Tuesday is beginning well. This week we are taking a look at we started yesterday with keeping up. I don't know that I really have a great title for this week's sermons, but or this week's devotions, excuse me. But they're all going to revolve around the pressures that we face or that we feel during the holiday season, especially around Christmas. We all have the desire or we feel compelled to try to keep up with everybody, what everybody else is doing. Excuse me, if I can get my words together this morning. And so this week I'm going to go through and various scriptures to look at this and to try to help you out with understanding we don't have to maintain what the world says is a standard around Christmas time. And so yesterday, wow, I might get going here today. Yesterday, we began to look at if our ambition, if what is driving us and motivating us to get something done is what somebody else is doing, then it's vanity. It's not good. It's all wrong. And so our motivation and what drives us in life and what fuels our passion should be the Lord. It shouldn't be other people's success. It shouldn't be other people's failures. It shouldn't be any of that. It just should be the Lord. Well, this morning in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, the first five verses, I'm going to read them, but the first 5 verses deal with their exhortations. He's exhorting as he's concluding this letter. He's exhorting them and he's saying, just remember these final thoughts. Kind of a conclusion thing here. And so he says, let brotherly love continue and be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Remember them that are in bonds and bound with them, and them which suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. And now this was very simple, is that he's directing them to look back at everybody else and not themselves. And verse 4, the marriage is honorable, and in all in the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Finally, in verse 5, he says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. And then in verse 6, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Now, a very familiar passage this morning, and one that we often, one that we often, we love to quote or forsake us. Sometimes we always don't understand the implications of everything surrounding that. So as we look at this last chapter, he's declaring, he said, you need to be paying attention to everybody else. We're so self-centered and so self-consumed in advancing our own agenda that we'll forget those around us. And so he said, you need to let brotherly love continue. And you need to make sure that you have a willingness to help not just your brothers, but strangers. And he said, remember them that are in bonds. Remember them that are bound, whether they're in prison or whatever. And then he talks about marriage. And marriage is a big one. I don't have time to go through all these this morning in depth. But we understand that if we're going to have a successful marriage, we're going to have a marriage where we look at the spouse, not 50-50, but that we're both willing to go 100% for each other. And so it comes down to this statement, let your conversation be without covetousness. Now, this morning, this word conversation, in every morning actually, every morning, this means your body language, your actions and your motivations. It's not just your speech and the audible things that you put forward, but it means everything that you do and every motivation that you have. And so he said, let your conversation be without covetousness. He said, hey, listen, you don't need to, the reason behind what you do doesn't need to be covetousness. It doesn't need to be motivated by wanting what somebody else has. You know, it's good for us to look around and we see maybe a marriage where the husband and wives pray together, where the children are with them, they have a devotion in the evening. Well, it's good to look at that marriage and say, hey, we want to pattern that, or we want to do that. But it's never good to covet that, and that our life, the driving force in our life is just to be like that person. The driving and the motivating factor in our life should be to be like Jesus Christ. And so he gives these examples here as we're reading. And this morning, I want to challenge you. How much of your life is being lived? How much of your life is motivated by covetousness, by what somebody else has? I know that we live in a culture today where people like to get on social media and they'll say, you can have this too if you will just, you can live like me if you'll just do these things. Well, why don't you live like God called you to live? I said this yesterday, I'm going to say it every day this week. Why don't you live and be the person that God called you to be? And whether that is a life of, whether that is a life that is maybe overflowing with money out of a bank account, maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be a life of travel. Maybe it won't be. But you know what? It just needs to be the life that God called you to live. I know that's not very deep this morning, and the devotion doesn't explore the depths of theology, but we need to understand today. And you'll be much happier going through this Christmas season if you are willing to let your conversation or your life or your manner in which you live be without covetousness. And let's live in a capacity that glorifies God. So he says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And tomorrow we're going to look at that word contentment, but he said, be content with such things as you have. You know, we oftentimes forget that having Christ in our life is enough. And we think we've got to add a great deal to him and his salvation, but having Christ in our life is enough. And so let's be reminded of that today as we go our way. I pray that you'll be blessed. I pray that throughout this, the rest of this holiday season, that you can focus on him. You can be encouraged. You can be blessed. You don't have to try to keep up with the Joneses. Well, I pray that you have a wonderful day, and I pray that God